Mara never expected that a simple lunch stop would lead to a moment that would haunt every single member of the Hells Angels for the rest of their lives. Because what she heard that day, faint, desperate, almost swallowed by the summer heat, was the sound of a man being slowly left to die, and the truth behind it would break something deep inside all of them. The roadside diner sat just off a long stretch of highway, the kind of place where truckers passed through and locals didn't ask questions. And on that particular afternoon, the air outside shimmered like it was alive, heat rising off the asphalt in ways that made everything look slightly distorted, like reality itself was bending under the pressure. Inside, the Hells Angels had taken over their usual corner booth, leather vest draped over chairs, heavy boots stretched out beneath the table, voices loud and unfiltered as they laughed over old stories and bad jokes, the kind that didn't make sense to anyone outside their circle, but meant everything to them. Rick sat at the center, his presence steady and grounded, while the others leaned in and out of conversation, the rhythm of brotherhood as natural as breathing. Mara sat beside him, quieter, observant, never needing to compete for attention because she saw more than most people ever would. And while the others focused on each other, she found her gaze drifting toward the window, toward the parking lot baking under the brutal sun. It started as nothing, just a flicker of unease she couldn't explain, the kind of instinct that doesn't come with words, only a feeling that something wasn't right, and then she heard it. So faint she almost dismissed it, a sound that didn't belong. She tilted her head slightly, listening harder, tuning out the laughter behind her, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the air conditioner struggling against the heat, and there it was again, a weak, broken noise, like something caught between a breath and a sob. Mara's fingers tightened around her glass. "You good?" Rick asked, noticing the shift in her expression, but she didn't answer right away because she was already standing, already moving toward the door like something was pulling her forward. The bell above the diner door jingled as she stepped outside, and the heat hit her instantly, thick and suffocating, stealing the air from her lungs for just a second as she scanned the parking lot, her eyes moving from one vehicle to the next, pickup trucks, a dusty SUV, rows of motorcycles gleaming under the sun, and then she heard it again, clearer now that she was outside, coming from somewhere to her right. Mara took a few slow steps, her heart starting to pound as she focused on a dark sedan parked slightly away from the others. Its windows rolled all the way up, no shade, no movement at first glance, just another car baking in the heat like the rest of them. But then she saw it, a faint shift in the back seat, something small and weak, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. She moved closer, each step heavier than the last, and that's when the sound came again, unmistakable now, a thin, desperate cry that made her stomach drop. "Rick!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the still air, sharp and urgent in a way that made heads turn inside the diner. The door burst open behind her as boots hit pavement, the men moving fast, instincts kicking in without hesitation, and within seconds they were gathered around the car, their expressions shifting from confusion to something darker as they peered through the glass. Inside, crumpled against the back seat like he'd been forgotten, was an old man. His face was flushed deep red, sweat soaking through his shirt, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths as his hand lifted weakly, tapping against the window with almost no strength behind it. "Jesus," one of the bikers muttered under his breath, the word carrying more anger than shock. Rick reached for the handle, yanked it hard, but it didn't budge. "It's locked," he said, jaw tightening. Mara didn't hesitate. She turned, grabbed a jagged rock from the edge of the lot, and without waiting for permission or second thoughts, she swung it hard against the glass. The window shattered with a sharp crack, shards scattering as a wave of trapped heat rushed out, hotter than the air outside, like opening an oven that had been left on too long. Rick reached in immediately, unlocking the door as the others moved to help, carefully pulling the old man out, supporting his weight as his body sagged against them, barely conscious. Up close, it was worse. His skin was burning to the touch, his lips dry and cracked, his breathing shallow and uneven like his body was shutting down piece by piece. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted, already pulling out a phone, while another biker grabbed a jacket and laid it on the ground so they could ease him down without burning him on the pavement. Mara knelt beside him, her hands steady even as her heart raced, brushing damp hair away from his forehead as she tried to get him to focus. Hey, you're okay," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. His eyes fluttered open just barely, cloudy and unfocused, but there was something in them. Fear, deep and ingrained, the kind that doesn't come from a single moment, but from something repeated over time. "Help?" he whispered, the word so faint she had to lean in to catch it. And as she did, she noticed something that made her breath catch. Bruises. Not just one. Not just accidental. Faded yellow marks along his arms, darker purple ones near his wrist, and something older near his collarbone, partially hidden beneath his shirt. Mara's expression hardened, something shifting inside her from concern to something sharper, more protective. This wasn't just a man who'd been left in the heat. This was a man who'd been hurt before he ever got into that car. The sound of sirens grew in the distance, cutting through the heavy air as the group stayed gathered around him, no one saying much now. The earlier laughter replaced by a heavy silence that settled over them all. Rick crouched beside Mara, his voice low. "You seeing this?" She nodded slowly, her eyes still on the old man. "Yeah," she said, her tone steady but laced with something unspoken. "This isn't an accident." The sirens grew louder, closer, but none of them moved away. Not yet, because something about this moment, about the heat, the silence, the broken man lying in front of them, felt like the beginning of something they couldn't walk away from, whether they wanted to or not. The ambulance door slammed shut, but the weight of what had just happened didn't stay behind in that parking lot. It followed them, heavy and unresolved, into the sterile white halls of the hospital where answers had a way of surfacing, whether people were ready for them or not. Mara sat in the back of the ambulance the entire ride, one hand wrapped gently around the old man's frail fingers as paramedics worked quickly around her, calling out vitals, starting fluids, placing oxygen over his face while the siren wailed above them, cutting through traffic and time alike. And even though everything was happening fast, it felt slow to her, stretched out, like every second mattered more than it should. "Stay with me," she whispered, leaning close enough so he could hear her through the chaos. And for a brief moment his eyes opened again, glassy and confused, locking onto hers like she was the only thing anchoring him to reality. His lips trembled. "They left me," he rasped, each word dragging like it cost him something to say it. Mara's grip tightened. "Who left you?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. But his eyes fluttered again, slipping shut as his body gave in to exhaustion, the question hanging unanswered in the air as the ambulance sped forward. By the time they reached the hospital, the rest of the bikers had already arrived, engines cooling in the lot outside as they filled the waiting area with an uneasy silence that didn't match their usual presence. No laughter now, no loud voices, just tension. Rick paced near the wall, arms crossed tight across his chest, while two of the others leaned against the vending machines, watching the hallway like they were waiting for something bad to walk through it. Mara sat down slowly, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. The heat, the locked door, the sound of that weak cry, and underneath it all, something else gnawed at her. Those bruises, that fear, that wasn't just neglect. That was something deeper, something intentional. An hour passed before a doctor finally stepped into the waiting room, her expression professional but serious, the kind that made people sit up straighter without realizing it. "Are you here for the elderly male brought in from the highway diner?" she asked, scanning the group. Mara stood immediately. "Yes. How is he?" The doctor exhaled slowly. "He's stable for now. Severe dehydration, heat exhaustion, borderline heat stroke. Another hour in that car, and we'd be having a very different conversation." A low murmur moved through the group, tension tightening instead of easing. Mara nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the doctor's face. "That's not all, is it?" she asked quietly. The doctor hesitated just long enough to confirm it. "No," she admitted. "There are signs of prolonged neglect. Malnutrition. Multiple bruises in various stages of healing. Some older fractures that were never properly treated." The room went still. Completely still. One of the bikers let out a slow breath through his teeth. Another shook his head, anger flickering behind his eyes. "You're saying someone's been hurting him?" Rick asked, his voice low and dangerous. The doctor didn't sugarcoat it. "I'm saying this didn't start today." Mara closed her eyes for a brief second, her suspicions locking into place. Family, she said under her breath. No one argued. It didn't take long for confirmation to walk through the front doors. 2 hours later, a man and a woman entered the hospital like they owned the place. They were clean-cut, well-dressed, the kind of people who looked like they belonged in a different world than the one the bikers came from. The man wore a pressed button-down shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to look casual but controlled, while the woman carried a designer purse and an expression that was already irritated before she even spoke. They approached the front desk without hesitation. "We're here for Harold Jenkins," the man said, his tone clipped, like this was an inconvenience more than an emergency. Mara felt it immediately, that rawness. Rick noticed her stiffen. "That them?" he asked quietly. She nodded once, her jaw tightening. The woman crossed her arms. "We've been looking everywhere for him. Honestly, he just wanders off sometimes. It's exhausting." Mara stood slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Every eye in the room shifted. "You left him in a locked car," she said, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension. The woman blinked, caught off guard for half a second before her expression hardened into something defensive. "Excuse me. We found him," Rick added, stepping forward beside Mara. "Windows up. No air. He was minutes from dying." The man's jaw clenched. "You don't understand our situation," he snapped. Mara didn't back down. "Then explain the bruises," she said. That did it. For a split second, both of them froze. Not long, not dramatic, but long enough. The woman scoffed, trying to recover. "He falls. He's old. He doesn't listen. Falls don't leave patterns," one of the bikers muttered from behind, his voice laced with quiet anger. The man's eyes flicked toward the group, measuring, calculating, clearly uncomfortable now. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "This is a family matter. We'll take him home and handle it." Mara took a step closer. "No," she said simply. The word landed heavier than anything else that had been said. Before the situation could escalate further, a nurse stepped in, her tone firm but controlled. "Sir, ma'am, the patient is still being evaluated. You'll need to wait." The couple exchanged a glance, annoyed, frustrated, but they stepped back, though not without the woman muttering under her breath about ridiculous interference. Mara watched them carefully as they sat down across the room, their body language tense, not worried, not relieved, just irritated. That told her everything she needed to know. Later that night, after the halls had quieted and most visitors had gone home, Mara slipped into Harold's room. The machines beeped softly, steady and reassuring, and for the first time since they'd found him, he looked less fragile. Still weak, still worn down, but alive. His eyes opened slowly as she approached, and this time, they stayed open. "You're safe," she said gently, pulling a chair closer to his bed. He studied her face like he was trying to decide if that was true. "They'll be back," he whispered, fear creeping into his voice. Mara shook her head. "Not if you don't want them to be." He swallowed hard, his gaze drifting toward the door like he expected them to walk through it at any second. "They said no one would believe me," he murmured. Mara leaned forward slightly. "Believe what?" For a moment, he hesitated, like the words themselves were dangerous. Then, slowly, they came out. "They take my money, my pension, said it's easier if everything's in their name, said I'd forget anyway." His voice trembled. "When I argue, they get angry." Mara's chest tightened. "Angry how?" she asked softly. He didn't answer with words. He just lifted his arm slightly, revealing another bruise beneath the hospital gown. That was enough. "They said if I told anyone, they'd put me in a home, or leave me somewhere no one would find me," he whispered. Mara felt something inside her crack open, anger rising fast and sharp, but she kept her voice steady for him. "You're not going back with them?" she said firmly. He looked at her, searching her face for doubt. There wasn't any. Outside the room, Rick stood in the hallway, having heard enough to understand everything without needing to hear the rest. He leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly, his jaw tight. "We're not letting this go," he said quietly to the others nearby. No one disagreed. Because this wasn't just about a man left in a car anymore. This was about a man who had been slowly erased by the very people who were supposed to protect him. And now, someone had finally seen him. By morning, the situation wasn't just emotional anymore. It was official. What started as a rescue in a diner parking lot had turned into something much bigger, something that couldn't be ignored or brushed aside. no matter how clean or convincing Harold's family tried to look. The hospital halls were quieter, but the tension hadn't gone anywhere. It had settled into something heavier, something deliberate. Mara sat beside Harold's bed again, watching as sunlight crept through the blinds, cutting across the room in long, pale lines, and for the first time since they found him, he looked like he'd actually slept. Not well, not deeply, but enough to breathe without panic. Across the room, Rick stood near the window, arms folded, keeping watch without saying it out loud, the way he always did when something mattered. "They'll come back today," Harold said suddenly, his voice still weak but clearer than before. Mara didn't pretend otherwise. "Yeah," she said. "They probably will." He nodded slightly, like he already knew that. "They don't like losing control." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything else he'd said so far, and Mara exchanged a glance with Rick. That wasn't fear talking anymore. That was experience. It didn't take long. Late morning, the same couple walked back into the hospital. But this time, they weren't alone. A man in a pressed suit followed closely behind them, carrying a thin briefcase and the kind of expression that said he was used to ending conversations before they even started. The energy shifted the second they stepped onto the floor. Rick straightened slightly. Mara's posture changed. Even the nurses seemed to sense it. "We're here to discharge Harold Jenkins," the suited man said at the front desk, his tone calm but firm, like he expected compliance without question. "I'm his legal representative." Mara stood before the nurse could respond. "No, you're not," she said. The man turned toward her slowly, assessing. "And you are?" "The one who pulled him out of a locked car before he died," she replied, her voice steady. The woman scoffed loudly. "This again? We've already explained." "You explained nothing," Rick cut in, stepping forward beside Mara, his presence enough to make the man in the suit pause, just slightly. "You left him in 100-degree heat." The man adjusted his tie, clearly irritated now. "My clients have legal authority over Mr. Jenkins' care and finances. If you continue interfering, we'll be forced to involve law enforcement." There it was. The threat. Clean. Polished. Wrapped in legal language. Mara didn't move. "Good," she said. "Call them." That wasn't the response they expected. There was a brief silence, just long enough for doubt to creep into the edges of the moment, before a new voice entered the conversation. "Actually, we already did." Everyone turned. A woman in a navy blazer stepped forward, holding a folder thick with documents. Her badge caught the light. "Adult Protective Services. We've opened an investigation into Mr. Jenkins' living conditions and financial arrangements," she continued, her tone calm but firm. "And based on what we've seen so far, he won't be going anywhere with you today." The shift was immediate. The woman's face lost its composure for the first time. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying." "He's consistent," the caseworker replied, "and the medical evidence supports his statements." The man in the suit tried to recover. "We'll handle this through proper legal channels." "You're welcome to try," she said evenly. "But for now, you need to leave." And just like that, the power they thought they had slipped. The couple stood there for a moment, their control unraveling in small, visible ways, tightened jaws, clenched fists, eyes darting for an exit that didn't feel like defeat. But eventually, they turned and walked out, their lawyer following closely behind, already whispering into his phone. The hallway exhaled as the tension broke. Mara didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until it left her in a slow, steady release. Rick placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "It's not over," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "But it started." Over the next few days, the truth came out piece by piece, and it was worse than any of them had expected. Harold hadn't just been neglected, he'd been systematically controlled. His pension redirected. His home signed over under pressure he barely understood. His independence stripped away one decision at a time until all that was left was dependency and fear. The bruises weren't accidents. The isolation wasn't coincidence. It was deliberate, calculated, and now, finally, visible. Legal proceedings began quickly after that. Investigations, statements, evidence, the kind of process that moved slowly on paper but carried real weight behind the scenes. Harold stayed in the hospital longer than expected, not just for physical recovery, but because for the first time in a long time, someone was making sure he was safe. And through all of it, the bikers stayed. Not out of obligation, not for recognition, But because once they stepped into something like this, they didn't step out. Rick showed up every morning with coffee. Even though Harold could barely drink it at first, Mara brought books, sitting with him for hours, reading when he didn't have the strength to talk. Others came and went, some loud, some quiet, but always present, always checking in, always reminding him in small ways that he wasn't alone anymore. At first, Harold didn't know what to do with that. He'd spent so long being dismissed, ignored, controlled, that kindness felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. But slowly, day by day, something shifted. He started talking more, smiling just slightly, asking questions instead of waiting for instructions. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. But it was real. A week later, he was discharged, not back to that house, not back to those people, but to a small assisted living community across town, one that had already been vetted, approved, and paid for through temporary legal arrangements while the case continued. Mara helped him settle in. Rick fixed a loose cabinet in his room without being asked. One of the others brought a small radio. Another brought a blanket. None of it was planned. None of it was coordinated. It just happened, like something natural, like something that had been missing and finally found its place. That first evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft shades of orange and gold, Harold sat outside in a simple chair, watching as a row of motorcycles lined up along the curb, engines ticking softly as they cooled. He shook his head slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I spent my whole life thinking family was something you were born into," he said quietly. Rick leaned against the railing beside him, arms relaxed for once. "Yeah," he replied. "Most of us learned that's not always true." Harold glanced at Mara, his expression softer now, clearer. "You heard me," he said. She smiled gently. "Barely," she admitted. "But you listened," he said. Mara shrugged lightly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." The group gathered around as the light faded, not in a circle, not in any formal way, just close enough to be there, talking, laughing, existing together in a way that didn't need explanation. Harold looked at them, these rough, loud, unexpected people, and something settled deep inside him. Not fear, not uncertainty, something steadier, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Belonging. Because the truth that broke all of them that day didn't end with pain. It ended with a choice. And they chose him.